Well, can I welcome everyone to our Western Sydney State of the Network Forum today. I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm hosting or recording this meeting webinar from the lands of the Darug people here in Parramatta in Western Sydney, but also wanted to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands in which you all work today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this meeting or webinar. I wanted to pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and the waters of New South Wales. I also want to acknowledge a few people that are on today. Of course, all the members of Business Western Sydney that are here. It's great to see you again for another forum. We're hoping to move back to doing these face-to-face very, very soon. We've got some special guests today. I just wanted to start with our partners for the event, the CEO of Endeavour Energy, Guy Chalky, and he's got a fantastic team, including Vita Cheeseman and Kate McHugh, who've been working closely with on this. So welcome, Guy, and all the members from Endeavour Energy. Also, Shane Fitzsimmons, who is the inaugural Commissioner for Resilience New South Wales, who would be familiar to all of you during the terrible bushfires about a year ago. To Sarah Hill, who's also the inaugural CEO of the Western Sydney Parklands Authority. And to Matthew Scard, who's the CEO of Celestino. If you don't know, they're the company that's delivering the wonderful Sydney Science Park out near the Aerotropolis, and to Scott Ryan, who's the Chief Asset and Operating Officer at Endeavour Energy. So welcome to all of you special guests, to all of our members. Really pleased to be partnering with Endeavour today for this event. I think, affordable and reliable energy in business, it doesn't matter what industry we're operating in, is absolutely essential. Endeavour Energy are looking to discuss how they're planning for a resilient, renewable and reliable energy future. And they really wanted to collect feedback or ideas on how this can be achieved from all of you. So they're going to be looking at, what will be required to help us transition to a low carbon environment whilst maintaining an affordable, reliable and secure grid, how we can make the network more resilient to keep power on when it's needed most, particularly during those critical times when we're in the middle of a bushfire, and we're obviously going to see more of those in the future. The session's really broken into three parts. We're going to hear from Guy Chalky and Scott Ryan giving us a brief speeches at the beginning of the event. Then we're going to have that big panel discussion with all those people that are so important to the future of Western Sydney and its energy. And then finally, there's going to be an opportunity for breakout rooms where you'll be broken up and you'll have a chance to chat more directly one-on-one, but with smaller groups. It's really important that if you've got a question, we really want to hear your questions. You can use the chat box to put your question in there. If we don't get to an answer for your question today, we will get an answer, or perhaps more importantly, Endeavour Energy will get an answer, perhaps via us. So no questions silly. They really are keen to hear the views of the community and the business community around the network and the reliability in Western Sydney. So thanks very much for coming. In terms of housekeeping, we are recording the session, so please bear in mind that your comments in the chat will be recorded. Please stay on mute. We don't want to hear any barking dogs. I've done that myself. We love barking dogs. We just don't want to hear them on this particular webinar. And if you put your questions in the chat, I'll be able to read them out later on. And to show your engagement, we'd also like you to interact with our presenters by using the reaction functions in Zoom. And someone knows where they are. I don't, but they're there, guarantee you. So thank you very much. I wanted to perhaps move straight on now to Guy Chalky, who's the CEO of Endeavour Energy, doing a fantastic job there, lives in Western Sydney most of the time. He's had an interesting time, like all of us have in the last 2 years with the pandemic. Guy, introduction to you. Thanks for making the time to be with us today, and over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. Thank you for that. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the first Western Sydney State of the Network Forum. I'm sort of reflecting, I'm hoping this is the last time this gets done as a Brady Bunch with lots of boxes as well, because I think we're pretty close now in Sydney to actually going back to old school and actually meeting each other, which will be fantastic. So yeah, for me, probably picking up with sort of David, Guy Chalkley, CEO of Endeavour. I've been here 18 months, just over. So pretty much my sort of knowledge of Western Sydney this time has literally been through a COVID pandemic. So an interesting experience that I'm sure we all can't wait to sort of get out of. I sort of just reflecting, I've sort of landed in Parramatta. And I sort of reflect on Parramatta for me, and I feel, you know, this accent clearly isn't Australian. This is quite a pretty sad South London accent, and I've always thought that Parramatta, I feel like I've done sort of a 40-year sort of circle, and I've closed the loop again. I feel like I'm back in South London, which is probably why I like it, because I think it's got that sort of edge and that diversity. And you can see the sort of thirst for the growth that's going to come, and how much people sort of want it. I sort of was just going to pick up just a line out of the acknowledgement to country, and I think there's a really important line in that as we sort of spend the next sort of 40 minutes on Western Sydney, and that's that line that you sort of acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. And I think that's a really important one, because we don't really own anything. But we've got a pretty important legacy to leave. We've got to be pretty respectful for what we've got. We've got a great blueprint to do something very different. We've got a great opportunity to do it right. But I think we all want to sort of look back in 30 years and make sure we have done it right, and really have sort of understood how we are a custodian for something for the next generation. Endeavour sort of goes back a long way. It goes back, you know, if I look back to Penrith, it goes back to the 1890s, and it started pretty small, and it's amalgamated, but it now sits with 2.6 million sort of people dependent in our sort of geography for safe, reliable, and affordable power. And I think importantly, as we sort of walk forward, it's also looking for sustainable power. And so there's been some twists and turns in that sort of 100 years, but I think some of those have never changed. But I think that sustainability one, you know, we know has come to the forefront, and that is really going to be part of our discussion over the next sort of session. I think if I look at sort of Western Sydney, I think you can't sort of miss the fact, because it's pretty much in print and it's on the internet every day, how much investment's actually going into Western Sydney. I think we're above 40 billion now. We're above 40 billion, and we're still rising. So we know that's got commitments in terms of a new Western Sydney airport. We've got commitments from a new city at Bradfield, and we've got obviously the whole precinct around that, Aerotropolis and Parkland. And obviously, you know, we've got people like Matthew from Celestino's in the science park, so you can see what's really happening. But what we do know is there's about 1 million extra people that are going to be living here in the next 10 to 15 years. We also know that sort of population, if we sort of roll forward that 15 years, I think we can make a really easy assumption that nearly all of them is going to have solar panel rooftop EV. With I reckon 2 EVs. I reckon a lot will have behind the meter batteries. I think we'll have a lot of batteries in front of the meter. So if you think about that traditional poles and wires business and sort of just gaze forward for a few years, you're going to envision something very, very different, and we've got to plan for that accordingly. But I suppose you can plan with some certainty, because you sort of can see where it's going. I think, you know, for me, the other one that's really played out, you know, certainly in the last month, but really been building to sort of COP26 and Glasgow, and that sort of global climate forum that's happening. And again, I think really cognizant that how do we actually get to something that's sustainable, that's clean, that's renewable, and it's really sustainable for the next generation. So sort of picking out, you know, some of the sort of things that have played out in the last year, and you sort of watch people, you know, get into net zero by 2050. I reckon most of us are moving to a page that's probably old hat, and you're probably going to be close to 2040, and I reckon you're going to be pushing even quicker on that as well. So I think that timeline just moves quicker, faster, but in a good way. And we know there's going to be that sort of massive transformation from sort of coal as a fossil to renewable. And we can already see just in the distribution space that Endeavour sort of sits in, that you know, the biggest power generator is not actually at that top end anymore, but it's going to be sitting on people's roofs. So how do we capture it? How do we make it so that it's resilient for everybody? I sort of look at it and I sort of say that there's probably 3 challenges that play out there, and they're challenges in a good way, because I think that those challenges lead us to get a much better outcome for customer and community as we go forward. But I think the first one is just that expectations that, you know, meeting those changing needs in terms of safe, sort of affordable and reliable. I think we can see in terms of the choices that people have got, and I think they've got much more control over the decisions that they can make. So we've got to be in there, not just being reactive, but much more proactive to what that customer has. I think people can see that you'd probably be mad not to have solar if you could have it. So we've sort of got to make it more available for everybody, but equally we've got to adapt our network to take that one going forward. And it has fundamentally changed our network. It's not just us pushing power into people's houses and industrial and commercial businesses. It obviously is us understanding how we can take it back and use it to the benefit of everybody. I think the second one I always think now, and obviously pretty evident, in terms of what's gone on in New South Wales in the last 18 months to 2 years, is that impact of climate change. Because I think we've definitely had that trifecta of the worst bushfire, an incredibly large flood, and we're always susceptible to some pretty impressive storms. So how do we make our network resilient to something that we know keeps happening? And I think that lends itself to some of the innovation and different solutions that are out there. I was reflecting yesterday, and because I think people were talking about microgrids, and I was reflecting that it's actually 9 years since Hurricane Sandy ripped through the east coast of America, and it pretty much knocked out pretty much New Jersey and New York. And there's a pretty famous photograph that there's this little bit of light in a dark environment, and the little bit of light was Princetown University, and the reason that they were still alight was they actually had a microgrid, and that was 9 years ago. So I think we know that has matured to an extent that we can provide those solutions that works for the customer and the community, and I think we can pick up on what's happened, not just learning from our own experiences, but what's happened worldwide, and we're much more mature. And I think those solutions aren't, they clearly aren't emerging, they've emerged, and we've got to make those offerings to customer and community. And I think the last one for me, that third challenge is probably just understanding. You can see the growth that's coming. So that massive challenge of an incredible amount of growth, but an amount of growth that we know, as I say, will be combined with obviously solar panels from a renewable perspective. That will be combined with obviously electric vehicles that are coming. That'll be combined with a much more mature battery development, which is a real game changer in terms of storage. So how do we harness all that, use it, capture all the data, which I think is really key, so that we can make our network the most reliable and the most resilient, and still maintain its safety and affordability as we transition to that sustainability place. So they're probably my placeholders. And with that, I'm really going to hand over to Scott Ryan as Chief Asset and Operating Officer at Endeavour, because I think he'll share in more detail some of those options and solutions. But I think the real key for me is probably hearing from you. I think you can give as much as in terms of knowledge, in terms of what that community wants, as we can. And I think that's the whole point. I think how we plan that together is really how we're going to be successful in the future. So with that, I'll hand over to Scott.
Thank you, Guy. And welcome everybody to Endeavour Energy's State of the Network. Endeavour has a strong presence in Western Sydney, and just for the record, so do I. So I was born in Parramatta Hospital, and from there I grew up with my parents in Parramatta LGA before starting a family of my own and buying a house also in the Parramatta LGA. And yes, I proudly support the Parramatta Eels. And so at this business Western Sydney edition of the State of the Network, I feel as though I'm amongst friends. And we've got an exciting future planned for Western Sydney and all our customers, and we'd like to explore that with you today. So let's move to our opening slide. And this really sets the framework for why we invest in the network and how we communicate our investment plans to our customers. You can see on the next slide 4 circles. And the first orbit is about meeting the changing customer expectations for a safe, affordable, and reliable electricity supply. And out of all of this, we've seen an interesting shift in priorities from our customers. So 5 years ago, affordability was the lightning rod for our customers. And now there's this emergence of reliability, resilience, and sustainability. And our investment plans reflect these trends. The second orbit is supporting the sustainable growth of our communities, very relevant, particularly in Western Sydney. We're fortunate, there's so much growth in our heartland, but we don't take it for granted. We need to work hard. We need to engage with our customers and stay agile. The third orbit you see, it's about providing a resilient network for the community that protects against increasing external hazards. With climate change, we're seeing more frequent and more intense weather impacts on the network, and our customers are really relying on us to be there when it counts. And finally, the fourth orbit, which is about enabling customers' energy choices for a sustainable future. So that relates to the rise in solar, batteries, electric vehicles, and the new technology that is still emerging. Our role at Endeavour is to link all this together, enable it, so that our customers and the environment can benefit. Speaking of our customers, on our next slide, you'll get to see a summary of the customer feedback. And we've obtained this from focus groups that we've held with our customers. But to be frank with you, we've also had a lot of unsolicited feedback from our customers, and that's often during times of stress when there's outages. But the strongest feedback that we've been getting from our customers is about how important a reliable electricity supply is to them. They also told us that how we respond in emergencies is really critical to them. And of course, affordability is still and will remain an important factor for our customers. They've also told us they'd like us to research, trial, and install new technologies. And finally, they've said to us, please keep us informed. And this feedback is really invaluable to us because it allows us to target our behaviour and our investment strategies. On the next slide, you'll see a summary of our reliability performance. Endeavour Energy is in green there. This was the most important factor to our customers in the focus group feedback, reliability. But what this chart shows you is that we are middle of the pack compared to other distributors in the country. And we're not satisfied with that. With electrify everything as an emerging trend, our customers are becoming more dependent than ever on electricity. And we intend to deliver for them. So our ambition is to continue to improve our reliability performance for our customers. On the next slide, you'll see how we're going with that ambition. This shows our normalized SAIDI results, our normalized reliability results. And it's a measure of the day-to-day performance of our company. So think blue sky days like we have today, also the grey sky days, but we extract from this information storms, really extreme storms, the floods, the bushfires that we've seen in recent times. And as you can see, this is over 20 years. So we've had a pretty healthy improvement over that time. We're on the right path and we intend to improve even further. And how are we going to do that? Well, that's about focusing in the right areas, and 85% of the reliability impact is in our high voltage network. So that's what we're targeting. We've got an existing underground program, and we're proud of the fact that we are ranked 3rd in the country on percentage underground. And by 2030, more than 50% of our network will be underground. We also have insulated conductors, where we've doubled the covered conductor on our network over the past 10 years, and that's more reliable. But most importantly, in our automation program, we've increased the automated switches on our network. So imagine a network that can figure out where the fault is, switch around it, and fix it before the space of 10 seconds, really, and the supply can come back on. So I've been fortunate. I've been able to visit utilities around the world, from Europe, North America, and the United Kingdom. And the critical trend I noticed was that a targeted automation strategy was linked to when their customers would see a dramatic improvement in service. So we're looking to do the same thing. And that will improve not only reliability, but also resilience. And that's a discussion in itself. And we'll have that on the next slide. So on this next slide, this speaks to climate change and resilience. And it's a different graph to the previous slide. This is the felt experience of our customers. And it does include bushfires. It includes floods. It includes those major storms. This shows everything that climate change has thrown at our customers and the network. The summer of 2019 and 20 was particularly impactful. We had 3 major fires burn across 45% of our franchise area. And I can say from experience, having visited those fire zones in Gospers Mountain, Greenwaddle Creek, and the Currawong fires, and engaged directly with our customers impacted by the events, they told us that electricity supply was critical. It meant the difference for them between having water pumps to fight fire, communications to their family, their friends, and to emergency services, and even for simple things like getting petrol to escape a fire zone. So a resilient network, it's mission critical for our customers. But we're actually seeing a gap now. We're seeing a gap between these major events. And so that raw reliability that you see on this slide versus the normalized reliability on our previous slide, that gap's increasing. And unlike the previous slide where we saw a downward trend, a positive downward trend, we're actually seeing a negative upward inflection on this particular slide as climate change starts to accelerate the issues that we've got. And to me, that's the perfect storm, if you'll pardon the expression, because it's an area, just as our customers are becoming more and more dependent on electricity, we're finding it harder to keep the lights on for them. So we really want to focus on that for our customers. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about how we support growth in our network. So for years now, we've applied a principle of just in time for our electrical network. However, development across our franchise has accelerated in recent years, and that's being driven largely by Western Sydney, the Aerotropolis, the $40 billion investment that Guy talked about, the new airport, roads, metros, the new cities. And this has led to situations where just in time has bordered on becoming just too late. And that doesn't sit right with us. We enable development, we support our customers, we don't hold them back. So we had a recent case study in Western Sydney, and we accelerated the build of our network at the request of our developer. However, short lead times for large connection requests has meant that we're actually adding capacity to the zone substation before we've even finished building it. So this is where the field of dreams concept can turn into a world of pain if we're not agile and responsive to the strong growth in our franchise. And Western Sydney, it's the powerhouse behind this trend. And it's worth just unpacking some of these game changers. And for me, you can't go past data centers. So imagine a huge warehouse the size of Bunnings or bigger, and it's filled from floor to ceiling with computers and air conditioning. They are load giants on our network. And to size it for you, 12 months ago, we forecasted an additional 900 MVA by 2028 from data centers. Today, we're forecasting that will be 2,000 MVA. So it's more than doubled in the space of a year. Across Western Sydney, about a dozen data centers are planned over the next 10 years. So it's a growth industry. And just one final point to keep it in perspective, a standard zone substation that we will build to support 10,000 residential customers, that's about 45 MVA. So let's just compare that to a data center, which can be 100 MVA and even more. That's one customer. Not 10,000, one customer. So they are load giants, and we need to be agile in how we plan for and connect these customers. And that's why we're proposing to shift from just in time to just in advance. And that's to enable the economic growth in our franchise. This will require more optimistic load growth forecasts and strong interaction with our developers and government moving forward. If we move to the next slide, you'll see what we call the Duct Curve. This is Endeavour Energy's Duct Curve, and it gets its name from the changing shape of the demand profile year on year, and it resembles the shape of a duck. So our duck shows a two, David turning his head, it does resemble the shape of the duck if you look close enough, mate. Our Duct Curve shows a two-speed challenge. It's got a growing peak in that head of the duck, and that's getting higher year on year. So each line represents a new year in Endeavour Energy's world. And we're seeing a growing dip in the belly of the duck. And that's from all the solar panels that are going onto the network through a lot of the homes around Western Sydney. In fact, we now have several of our zone substations flowing in reverse on sunny days, particularly in the northwest corridor of Sydney. And that's creating a voltage management challenge for us here and now. And over time, it can lead to broader system stability changes. So this really highlights for us the need for increased flexibility and demand. You know, a fantastic world would be where we could move those peaks into the belly and have a more utilized network, which meant we could invest less in the network. We don't have to invest for the peak of the duct curve. We can just have a more steady flow. So that's what we're really trying to do. And having a dynamic control of the loads on our network is where we transform into a distribution system operator role. And that moves away from the traditional static approach that we've had in the past. And if on the next slide, we can look at one of the game changers that we can see that impacts on the duct curve. And this is the emergence of electric vehicles. And this is a key part, of course, of the broader trend of electrification of everything. So electrifying transport is an important move. Now we're starting to prepare for this now. The key takeaway on this slide is that there are few electric vehicles in Endeavour's network currently, but we're expecting this to grow to about 200,000 EVs by 2029. And that's going to be about 60 megawatts of additional peak demand. And it could be as high as 90 megawatts on that higher upper curve that you see on this particular slide. So in a worst case scenario, with uncontrolled charging in people's homes, there could be quite limited capacity for charging with as little as 20% penetration. But that's only if we're caught flat-footed, and we don't intend to be caught flat-footed. So let's pick up on that flexibility theme. Electric vehicles, they're effectively batteries on wheels. So they've got a really exciting potential to be flexible demand to help smooth out that duct curve challenge we saw earlier. So often EVs are described as a problem for the network, but they can also be a solution. So think how good it would be if we charged an electric vehicle in the belly of the duct instead of in the peak. So to this end, we're working on developing some proactive electric vehicle charging offers for our customers. This includes designing new controlled load tariffs, as well as conducting coordinated smart charger trials. We're also being proactive with electric buses and seeking to partner with them to identify the best parts of the day that they can charge to benefit the duct curve and reduce expenditure on the network, which brings down the cost of electricity for everybody. So lots of activity in this space. If we move now to the next slide, this is a spotlight on our conservation voltage optimization program. So this is one of our early initiatives on our distribution supply operator journey, where we transition from being a set and forget approach to dynamic voltage management. Now it's complicated engineering, but we are very excited, and I do want to take the time to explain this to you, so stick with me on it. If we think back to our duct curve again, what this program allows us to do is ride the voltages down during the middle of the day when the solar panels are on the maximum, and that extends the appliance life for customers' appliances. It increases renewable energy. This program also allows us to bring the volts back up again as the sun sets to prevent power quality issues. And importantly, it provides energy savings for our customers through more optimal voltage levels to their appliances. And these energy savings, they flow through to emissions reductions from upstream generation. So that's the best part of it all, really. To date, we've saved about 5,000 tonnes of CO2. So this is a real key contributor to our sustainability objectives. Moving on to our next slide, we'll be talking batteries. So our customers are changing, technology is changing, and we're changing our network to adapt. An exciting opportunity that we're exploring is incorporating a battery into our existing zone substations, and that's to defer future investment. So we're currently partnering with another organisation for a Western Sydney zone substation, and we'll basically contribute to the battery for network deferment benefits rather than enhancing the network right now. So the tools at our disposal to have a more optimal network to save money for our customers are just increasing. So our customers have told us that they want us to be working to secure their future electricity supply and help them to reduce their electricity bills. And this is how we can do it. The experience we gain from this project will help us build and operate a secure, reliable, and affordable network in the future. So we are exploring other locations for similar battery systems to be deployed in growth areas, and we can integrate that with our existing network. So speaking of integrating with existing network, if we move to the next slide, we'll look at some other technology that we're also looking to employ, and that's the microgrid. And Guy referenced this in his opening as well. we've got a great opportunity with the greenfield development in Western Sydney. If you're building our network from scratch today, you'd build it differently. You'd be using the latest in technology. And the beauty of Western Sydney is that we are building a network from scratch in a whole new area of our franchise. So we're aiming to integrate microgrids into Western Sydney with automation, community batteries, vehicle to grid charging and so on, with the goal of being able to island communities from the main grid during periods of need. Strategically, it allows us to look at our network through the lens of the future grid, figuring out how all these elements can work in combination. So this is a pioneering project for us, and it's great that we can explore it in Western Sydney, potentially at the Sydney Science Park. And that leads us now to our final slide, and we finish the way we started with our 4 themes: meeting changing customer expectations for a safe, affordable, and reliable electricity supply, supporting the sustainable growth of our communities, providing a resilient network for the community that protects against increasing external hazards, and enabling customers' energy choices for a sustainable future. So they're the themes I'd like to leave with you, and I'll pass you back now to David, our moderator, for the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. That was an excellent presentation. Lots to learn from that. And I wanted to commend you on your choice of football team. So well done. Although we were robbed in the semis. But anyway, on to the important issues, which is the panel. I wanted to introduce our panelists, or reintroduce our panelists for you. Shane Fitzsimmons, the inaugural Commissioner of Resilience New South Wales. Hey, Shane, great to have you here. Dr. Sarah Hill, the CEO of the Western Sydney Parkland Authority. Hey, Sarah. Matthew Scard, the CEO of Celestino, that's building the Sydney Science Park, amongst other great projects. And of course, Scott Ryan, the Chief Asset and Operating Officer of Endeavour Energy. I just wanted to maybe start with an open question about disruption, because we've seen more disruption in our lives, I think, in the last 2 years than we would have expected ever, particularly with the pandemic, with bushfires, floods, and so on. I wanted to ask, maybe start with you, Shane. Is disruption the new normal? Do we have to just recalibrate the way we our risk factors in life and how we react to them? What's your view? What's your advice?
Yeah, thanks, David. Look, I think the simple answer is yes, we do. And what I mean by that is, if you look at New South Wales just over the last couple of years, the consecutive and compounding nature of disasters and disruption that has impacted communities right across the state has been extraordinary. We've had communities on their knees with drought. We then experienced the worst ever bushfire season, most protracted and geographically most spread. We then came straight out of that, and we were into storms and floods that disrupted local communities. That was in February of last year. Then by the time we hit March and April, we were right into the thick of COVID and all that comes with managing COVID. We then went through a very difficult year. Throw in a mouse plague through the rest of 2020. Throw in an exponential growth in cybercrime and cyber activity. We all turned into 21, hoping it would be a better period. And we had one of the most significant rainfall events and flooding events that impacted northwestern Sydney, the Hawkesbury Nepean catchment, and also the mid-coast and north coast areas. And then, of course, coming out of that of March, we're into the Delta variant of the COVID pandemic, just to throw in another challenge for people across New South Wales. But I think the challenge is, David, that historically speaking, disasters have always happened, but they've tended to happen somewhere to somebody. And yes, they make significant headlines and they're extremely disruptive to those local communities, but they're generally geographically constrained. And we've seen significant damage and disruption to infrastructure. As Scott and others, a guy I've already mentioned this morning, the fire season alone, thousands and thousands of of power poles, hundreds of thousands of kilometres of power line infrastructure that all had to be reconstructed, not to mention all the other material infrastructure that's got to go with that. But the speed with which our companies have been able to partner with governments and communities and put that back online is quite miraculous, really. But as communities and as individuals, we are extremely surprised, believe it or not, time and time again, when we see disruption. We are growing as communities to be ever and increasingly dependent and taking for granted that things like power, things like communications, things like water and sewer will be operational even in those difficult and challenging times. And for COVID being a disruption, not necessarily to the loss of power, but to organisations like Endeavour, COVID has seen a significant shift and a demand curve change for an even greater expectation on utilisation and consumption of power, and therefore a growing dependency and expectation that it's going to be highly available, highly redundant, highly resilient to disruption and effects. So we do need to be understanding what it means to be resilient. How do we anticipate and ready ourselves for the next disruption or displacement? What does that mean? How will we prepare and ready ourselves? How will we endure that? And then how do we pull together and rebuild, heal, and recover from those big events? So yeah, absolutely. We need to expect, particularly with the forecasts ahead for more frequent and intense weather events and other disruptors, we need to actually ready ourselves individually and collectively as businesses, families, communities, organisations, and indeed as individuals for disruptions going into the future.
Fantastic, Shane. And look, for the other panelists, feel free to jump in. Sarah Hill was just messaging saying, talk about resilience. Apparently her computer is just reset for an update, so anything can happen. So Scott or Matt, if you want to chime in, please do.
Thanks, David. I guess on your question around is disruption our new normal, well, I believe it is. I think we've seen so many industries that have been disrupted by way of new technology, better data, and linkages that have just never been there in the past. And I think, as Shane accurately said, you've also got disruption from changes in the environment through climate change itself. I think it's always better to disrupt yourself before someone else does it. And so that is why we are embracing new technologies and why we are trying to find ways to build a different network, a better network with batteries, with microgrids, and looking for new ways to use our data so that we can get ahead of that curve. And so I think that's really the key, about having your radar on, scanning that environment to understand what is happening, what are the emerging trends, who's wrestling with this like we are, and how can we best adjust.
And Scott, I wanted to maybe just go to, you mentioned in your talk there that you were getting different feedback from customers and consumers. 5 years ago, price was the overriding factor in their minds when they were thinking about Endeavour Energy or their power bills. But that's changing, and resilience is a big part of it after the things we've gone through in the last couple of years, but also sustainability. So I mean, how do you actually gauge that? How do you get that information from? And the challenge, I guess, is you've got diverse customers, haven't you? And they probably have different needs and different views on this. So how do you pull that together?
There's been a real shift, and it's one that you can pick up in the media and talking with friends and family. And so I started to get a hunch before we actually went and spoke to our customers. But lo and behold, when you go out and you talk to the customers, it just keeps being played back at us. Unprompted, they talk about the reliability of the network and how important that is to them. They talk about climate change. There used to be a debate over climate change. Oh, is it real? Is it not? Not seeing that anymore. People are on board. And sustainability is just so important. There's been a real shift in terms of how our customers think. And certainly on a 5-year rolling basis, when you stop and take stock of things, it's quite remarkable how that does shift and change. That, of course, then leads to, well, how do we need to adjust our investment in the network? What's becoming more important? And with the electrification of everything, we can't be the supplier that isn't there for our customers when everything rides on electricity. They can't get into their electric vehicles and go somewhere. They can't work from home. They can't use their social media. They can't communicate with their family and friends. Everything will be riding on electricity. So the standards that we were held to 5 years ago have increased, and that's what we need to adjust to.
Yeah, look, someone sent me a website the other day called Rewiring Australia, and I think it's a similar thing that's happened in the US, where there's a focus on trying to decarbonise the home with moving from gas to induction and from petrol to EV. And Matthew Scull, you're building a whole new suburb out there. You're presumably trying to make it the best you can. And how are you approaching these issues that we've been talking about today in your new project? Sorry, Matt, I think you're on mute.
That's a great start. Sorry about that. Great question. And it all comes back to having, firstly, great partners like Endeavour Energy on board, but really be in touch with our customers. And understanding what they're wanting. They're asking more of these questions now as well. Is there going to be gas? Is there going to be power? Induction power is taking off because people realise that's connected to the solar on the roof. So there's simple things like that happening. At point metering, smart homes. That's another one. People can now see on their iPhone. They can control it from anywhere in the world or at work. Working from home, patterns of use as well. That's changing household design. Now the homes everyone's moving towards detached dwellings, bigger homes. So then they're thinking about those spaces. How do we have passive airflow? So we're seeing a lot of those questions that do all relate back to how someone lives in their home, but also then the bigger question about energy use.
Fantastic. And I just wanted to bring in Sarah Hill now. Sarah, you're back. You've been resilient. The computer's been resolved. We can see you. That's great. Sarah, I wanted to ask you about that issue of collaboration, because we know as the CEO, you've got this amazing job of designing a new city. What a fun! I'd love to do that. I want your job. Designing the city of Bradfield, providing all the jobs, the job targets, the economic strategy for that sort of Parkland city. But also it's actually about getting all of these various utilities in, and they include water and gas and electricity and other things. So I wanted to ask your view about collaboration with these various entities, which are quite separate, and how do you collaborate to deliver world-class infrastructure?
Yes, it's a very good question, David, and just a modest little question to kick off. And apologies, everyone. Right in the middle of the panel, my computer decided to do a software update. So we talk about resilience in many different frames, and certainly sort of jumping on a backup is important. But great presentation, Scott, and wonderful to be here. Always good to listen and learn what's happening. But David, you're right, this is an absolute dream job, and really going from that idea of a concept of 3 cities to now building one is a pretty exciting move, and certainly working with our key stakeholders such as Matthew at Celestino and key utility providers is just such a fundamental element of it. I think the important thing is, often as city builders, we think about what happens above the ground, and we think about buildings, and we think about, green spaces and a whole host of critically important city-making components. But so much of that is supported and enabled by our utilities and what happens, in many regards, and increasingly so, below the ground. And Scott, really interesting to hear your stats about the increasing proportion of your equipment that's going below ground. And certainly that's our ambition for the Parkland city, is to really think about building the city for not the next generation, but the next several generations. And to be a true 22nd century city, we need to think about the end state rather than where we are now. So for us, we've had the great joy of working with a guy who's an absolute champion of thinking differently and thinking innovatively, and bringing together a group of utility agencies to think about co-location, co-delivery, and new ways of doing things. So just like Matt, we want to ensure that the Parkland city is the first hydrogen-ready city. We want to ensure that we do have distributed networks and alternative fuel and storage sources. We want to make sure that we start to turn some of those 1 in 100-year shocks and stresses that we've just experienced in the Parkland city into a story about resilience and a story about how we do things better, and really be the poster child internationally of how we turn a challenge into a great outcome and build a more livable city. So there's a heck of a lot to do here, and one of our starting points in that regard is what we call a blueprint, and we're literally in the throes of preparing it at the moment. The team are next door laying it all out and doing some pretty detailed work on it. But in effect, the blueprint really starts to map out in the Parkland city where the growth is occurring, where the infrastructure is now, where the gaps are, and what we need to do to start to line that up. And our utility providers are a key component in actually taking land that is rezoned into actual development. And so that's the next big push as we focus on the blueprint, but also critically turning a concept or rezoning into an actual outcome and development.
Fantastic. And great work on the sort of shared trench model that you've got there as well. But I might just come back to Shane Fitzsimmons. Shane, Resilience New South Wales, can you give us a little flavour of what you do and actually What's your role, I guess, in working with groups like Endeavour Energy and other utilities in trying to get more resilient networks, less impacts?
So look, that's a broad question, David, and I'll try and truncate that down. But as a new agency, the government formed us up after the 1925 season in recognition of what was an unprecedented recovery effort. So significant infrastructure rebuilding, homes and properties being rebuilt, businesses being rebuilt, significant community healing. So a massive recovery effort of a scale and a complexity like we've never seen, but also in recognition as we face the future, as we look ahead with the increased frequency and intensity of weather events and the growing interdependency of infrastructure, of telecommunications, of power and utilities, how vulnerable we are as communities. How do we work not just across and through government, but how do we forge meaningful and lasting relationships and partnerships, collaborations with business and not-for-profit and charity sectors and community groups and communities themselves, different community locations? How do we pull that together? How do we pull that thinking together? And centering around the sorts of discussion we're having today, we've also inherited the responsibility for leading the state's critical infrastructure strategy, and through that strategy, we're looking at 4 predominant areas. What does resistance look like? How do we do physical and other protection of infrastructure once we've identified it and categorized it and understood it? How do we look at working with those organizations and entities around reliability, the capability to continue operating in a whole range of different conditions and different demands? Redundancy. What is redundancy? How do we cope with less of individual components or disruptions in configuration of networks? How do we identify those redundancy options? And of course, as we have done very well for a long time, respond and recover. How do we enhance the ability to bounce back from disruption? And as a new agency with the new heading resilience, I remember it was going to be called disaster management and preparedness. And I remember the Premier and the Minister and the head of the public service said, no, we're going to call it resilience. And I said, what the bloody hell's resilience? Who's going to relate to resilience? Why would you call a new organisation resilience? And they go, no, Shane, we need to think a little bit bigger. So it got me thinking about what is resilience. And I can say in all conscience, even though my radar's been finely tuned for the last 18 months, I don't recall a time in my life when the word resilience has been used so much in family discussions, social discussions, business discussions and contemplation, strategy settings, mainstream media and government. We are all talking about this word resilience. So it really caused me to get out and read a little, reflect a lot on my decades of experience in disaster management, but also importantly, listening to people that were living through this really uncertain and difficult and challenging time. And what I've observed or what I've gleaned is, number one, I don't cop the generic definition that's out there. Resilience is bouncing back to normal after disruption. I call BS on that, really, because what is normal after disruption? What is normal anyway? But what is normal then after big disruption? And why would anyone want to bounce back to that normal state and be just as vulnerable or susceptible to impact or dislocation going forward? So really, in talking to people and reflecting a lot, resilience is about living through life experiences, and most importantly, learning through those lived experiences about how we can bounce out of or how we can come back from disruption and adversity wiser, stronger, smarter, and go forward with optimism and strength and courage. So to me, it's about those lived experiences. It's about learning from lived experiences, and to paraphrase a couple of old quotes and lines. I think Einstein identified the definition of stupidity as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So we've got to get smarter and wiser. And then the other old Darwinian attribute is it's not the strongest or the loudest of the species that survives. It's the species that is most able to understand and appreciate its changing environment and adapt and adjust accordingly to survive into the future. And I think it's those partnerships and those collaborations, and with Endeavour Energy, sharing data around design and configuration and network operations so that we can work together with preventative and strategies and investments, but also in times of tragedy, in big fires that are unfolding. How do we identify those core assets and the core architecture that needs to be prioritised over some other aspects, so we can limit disruption and limit the time it's going to take to repair and rebuild afterwards? So partnerships and collaboration, absolutely at the core of it. Learning through lived experiences and learning through the lived experiences of others. Don't wait for it to happen to us, and start readying ourselves and working together going forward.
Thanks, Shane. And I mean, I think we probably all found in the last 2 years we're a bit more resilient than we thought we were. If you had said 2 years ago, Shane, you're going to have to take all your meetings on the computer and not see anyone for 3 months and have helicopters flying over your house in Western Sydney, you would have thought they were mad. But we sort of did it and we got through it somehow.
Absolutely, but I would also qualify that, David, by saying I remember so vividly getting through all those fires. As we said, thousands of power poles, hundreds of thousands of kilometres of network cable that had to be relayed. You know, weeks and months of communities without power because of the extraordinary scale of it. That in the February, when the weather finally broke, we had microstorms on the northern suburbs of Sydney that twisted and distorted significant infrastructure, tore trees down, homes destroyed, power lines out. There were pockets of the community up there that were without power for a week or 2 weeks maybe, and they were apoplectic. They were completely beside themselves. And I just sat there for a moment thinking, have we lost context here with what so many other communities across the state have just been enduring for 5 or 6 months, and now we're without power in one of the most significant microstorms that's had a massive implication to the infrastructure. Crews were on scene immediately, repairing and working through how to restore it. But there's this growing intolerance around that sort of disruption, and a growing dependency, as Scott and Guy have said, on having power available and assuming it's always going to be there. And people feel helpless if they don't know how to charge their phone, because so much of what we do on our phone for business, for social, for living is all intertwined to it having a battery that's viable and functioning.
Yeah, fantastic, Shane. I just wanted to ask a question, maybe a bit more to Scott, Matt and Sarah, about this issue of intergenerational equity, and I guess in particular how it relates to energy. I mean, we have a really weird housing market at the moment, don't we, where there's just this kind of fever pitch of prices going up. It's really hard for young kids to get in the market. And then there's that sort of question around providing infrastructure in these growing areas of Western Sydney, and who actually pays for that infrastructure? Is it just the new person, the young person who's already paying for an expensive house, or do we all have a role in that? So I might just start with you, Scott. The issue of intergenerational equity, is that something that comes up much in Endeavour's role?
Well, it is, and a key thing for us is making sure that we're investing in the network in a smart way. So having the right sort of technology that doesn't become redundant, for example, so good engineering, and we're doing that through improving our quantification of risk, our cost benefit assessments, and we're prioritizing investments because you want to make sure that you're making efficient and prudent investments. It's also worth looking at how we set our targets on replacement expenditure. So as assets age, they need to be replaced. Now, one way you can save money for customers is you can push out that replacement a little bit further into the future. But what that can create inadvertently is a bow wave. And all of a sudden, you get this intergenerational issue that you're talking about. And at some point, chickens come home to roost, and you've got a large investment that you need to make. And you can get caught out, and suddenly you've got an underspending that gets compensated by a boom situation. And we want to avoid that as well. The bit about who pays, our tariffs tend to have a sharing model applied to them. So we like to keep this as a fair approach to our customers. So at some point, we're all new customers. You might be a customer for decades, but when you first joined us, you were a new customer. And we don't say that, well, you're a new customer, we're going to hit you up. We're in fact sharing that across the entire customer base. And the idea there is that we get our costs right, we can bring the price down for everybody. So that's really the main things that we tend to focus on, fairness and equity with our customers.
Fantastic. Got a question here in the chat box. So if you do have a question, type it into the chat box. We'll read it out and try and get to it. There's one here from Isa Usta. Thank you for the opportunity and a great presentation. As a manufacturer in the Erskine Park Industrial Precinct and a heavy user of electricity, What opportunities are there for minimising electricity costs? They're also owners of a site in the recently rezoned industrial precinct in the Mamre Road area. When will the power be available, and what plans are there for us to plan for our expansion? And it's from Dinsel Construction, which make the precast concrete walls, I think.
Sounds like a question for me, David.
Yeah, a couple of questions there, Scott.
Yeah. I'll point out the specific in my presentation. I talked about a zone substation that we were building in Western Sydney that before it's completed, we're now enhancing it. It's actually South Erskine Park zone substation, so the one that actually will help in this particular situation. This will be a 45 MVA transformer or a 45 MVA rated zone substation. Just 2 weeks ago, I approved that to become a 90 MVA zone substation. So we've enhanced it before we've even finished building it. The first amount of supply will be available in July next year. That's what we're targeting. And then not so long afterwards, within the space of certainly within 12 months of that, we'll have the full 90 MVA available. We're talking with major developers there who are speaking with people like, let me get the name right, like ESSA there. So those developers are speaking with us, and we're making sure that we can build just in advance rather than just in time, because we want to be able to enable the development in Western Sydney. So I think it's a very topical example. The specifics on Castlereagh might be good if we could reach out offline, but what I'll make in just some general discussion points is that there are some members or some customers on our network who have a poorer electricity reliability than others, and we want to make sure that people don't get left behind. So for those customers that have got a poorer served result, we want to make sure that we have very specific targeted responses for them and make sure that we can bring them up to the same level that other people in Western Sydney and the rest of our franchise area enjoy. So a couple of things there, but we'll reach out personally on that one to make sure we get the specifics right and understand the particular case there.
Yeah. I just want to ask a question, actually. If you've got a question, put it in the chat box. It will come to you. Actually, I might ask one now from Ting Ting Huang. In your opinion, what are the key factors for accelerating the drive towards sustainability for the energy and utility sector? What are the key factors? That could be for anyone just to put their hand up.
I'm happy to jump in, David. Yeah. I think this is, something we're thinking very, very much about, and I think it's something that's incredibly topical at the moment, as we know if anyone's watching the news lately. And I think we need to really turn sort of some concepts into some really pragmatic examples and options. So like Matthew, we're looking to create Bradfield City Centre as really a test bed for innovation and change, and not only talking about these things, but bringing our utility providers and stakeholders together to actually start delivering them. So hydrogen ready, as we've mentioned, cyber secure, ensuring that reliability of electricity, but other fuel sources as well, at the same time as creating a more livable environment. And when we talk about intergenerational equity, we're also talking about ensuring that we're minimising the impacts on our environment, that we're reducing carbon, and we're not exacerbating those incredible environmental challenges we have now. Because to be truly successful, we need to make sure that the Western Parkland City is an attractive and livable location. And we need to start addressing some of those key challenges that Shane has certainly been, made well aware of and been working very hard to address. So we're pretty excited about those opportunities. And if we think in sort of scales, we think about the whole Western Parkland City, which from an urban point of view is the equivalent of 2 Canberras north to south on top of each other. So an extraordinarily large area that we are concurrently developing across 72 kilometres at the moment. So when you talk about a real opportunity to make a change, this scale of development and the rate of change is really at a key point. If I can throw in one of Endeavour's own facts, is just the extraordinary uptake in solar panels on roofs. And I understand in 2010, 8,600 solar panels on rooftops, now connecting to their networks over 130,000. And the Western Parkland City is leading the way in that regard. So let's keep pushing that. Let's keep making them more efficient. And let's look to build the city through multi-utility corridors and tunnels in a more cost-effective way now, So frankly, we don't have to rip up the roads after the fact to augment services. And that to me is the benefit of a greenfield city that we're building, is that you can put these forward-thinking plans in place. And we know from our own analysis, my wonderful colleague, Natalie Camilleri, undertaking some analysis at the moment, about a third of Transport for New South Wales costs with major projects is just ripping up the road to locate and relocate the utilities. So let's do it right the first time and lead by example.
Fantastic. And look, I was going to ask a question to both Matt and yourself, Sarah, because you're both building, in a sense, new cities or towns along the new railway line there around the airport. I guess the first one was like, how are you planning for? There's almost no money going into the research for the internal combustion engine for the vehicles. It's all into electric vehicles. We are behind the world on this, but we're going to have to catch up at some point in time. So, is there any particular planning for EV in any of your areas? And I guess my second question was, there's a lot of focus on decarbonisation with individual houses, which is great. What about people that live in multi-unit housing who don't own the roof, or who collectively own the roof and maybe the roof's not big enough for them to generate solar? Is there anything they can do? So it's to both of you.
Yep, I could probably start on that one. Good questions. As Sarah said, we've got blank canvases. We've got these two greenfield sites. Sydney Science Park's 287 hectares with nothing on it at the moment. Yes, there's a metro station coming, but that blank canvas helps us control and influence the supply chain. And when I say the supply chain, everything from a single dwelling, an apartment building, commercial, industrial, whatever it may be. Now, and that influence will help us lead that conversation and drive what we believe is the right way with EV or any other type of sustainable power or use or anything like that. But ultimately, it comes back from what we see is it's all about getting close to the customers, setting ourselves sustainable and hopefully achievable targets, but be prepared to fail. We need to be able to fail to be able to learn, but we also need to know what success looks like. What we're all talking about today is quite sophisticated. Communicating that in a way to a customer so they can actually understand, actually, I know what they're talking about. I can be on board with this. And with EV, we can require all home builders to make sure that the garage has got an EV charging point already pre-wired. That's very simple. The cost of that is nothing. So, and then there's the whole green hydrogen, blue hydrogen. We've signed an MOU with them, with the UTS, and Sarah's doing great work down there at Bradfield. We need to coordinate on this to make sure that infrastructure is thought about now, because we're not going, it's so expensive, difficult to go back and put it in later. So now's the time. I think next year we're going to be very busy having to put rubber on the road with all the planning. We'll be in lockdown later this year. So the proof's in the pudding, and hopefully when we're talking again another 12 months, we're showing a bit more meat on the bones of what we're actually doing to actually achieve some of these goals.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Sarah, did you have anything to add on? You already sort of responded.
Yeah, look, I just really want to reinforce Matt's point about learning, and that means failing sometimes too, sharing those lessons with the industry. Both are major sites, learning from each other and refining and iterating as we go along. But we would be failing if we weren't planning a city now that wasn't designed for EV, cars, buses, and far more walkable. Just simple means such as walking around Western Parkland City. If I gave you the rates on walkability compared to other parts of the city, it's terrifying. And we talk about resilience, but we also talk about healthy living and people getting out and walking, good for your mental health, good for your physical health. But also being connected to services and connected to digital too. So that's a incredibly exciting opportunity that we have, but we need to make sure that we showcase this and we share those lessons with others so that they can continue to innovate. And that's really what our role is in establishing Bradfield City Centre.
Thanks, Sarah. Look, we've got a few questions that have come in now. We're not going to get to all of them. I just wanted to maybe go to one more before we move to our breakout sessions. And so to Sunella Barla and Phil Nichols, we will come back to you. But for Kerry Elliott, she had a question, I guess, to Scott around more detail on the microgrid. how can developers take advantage of this idea in the initial precincts around the metropolis?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm excited to see it actually, because what we really want to do is partner with developers when we're doing this. So we are currently at Endeavour Energy designing what a microgrid could look like. Now imagine a future, and I don't think it's actually a very distant future. I think we could actually build it now in Western Sydney if I could get some developers to partner with us. And this future would be one where there's automation on the network, you've got solar on the network, you've got community batteries, you've got electric vehicles and vehicle to grid. And in the event of a major storm or disruption, separate little microgrids could be set up, and on their own, they could be islanded and hold themselves for a period of time while we went about and fixed the backbone on the network. And that's possible. So we're designing that now, and we'd just love to be able to partner with developers. So look, we'll approach you, you approach us, and so Kerry will reach out to you also, because I think opportunities like these are things that we should be exploring.
Fantastic. So we might move now to, we'll get answers for all those other queries. And if you've got other queries, you're welcome to send them through and we can pass them on. But we're going to move to the virtual breakout rooms. So these are rooms with about 6 people in them. There's 3 questions that we would like you to ask. You'll be led by a host from Endeavour. The 3 topics are, what do you see as the greatest challenges and opportunities for Endeavour Energy in planning for the future of the grid in Western Sydney? Secondly, reflecting on the recent bushfires and floods, what kinds of things do you think Endeavour Energy should consider to improve the resilience of the energy network in the future? What are the possible solutions? And finally, how do you think emerging energy technologies will change the way people of Western Sydney live in the next 5 to 10 years? What do we need to do to support vulnerable customers? So we're going to break into those virtual groups somehow. I've got no idea how it all happens, but it's going to happen. But look, thank you to Guy, the CEO, who didn't get his backdrop right, but it's still very green, which is great. And thank you to all of our panellists today, Scott Ryan, Matt Scard, Shane Fitzsimmons, our Resilience Commissioner, and Dr. Sarah Hill. We're going to go into the virtual breakout rooms and we're getting close to the end. So really appreciate this partnership with Endeavour, keen to do it again. And it was just such a great turnout to have over 100 people join in for this. So let's move to the breakout rooms.
Thank you.
Somehow. Thanks everyone for that. It was a bit of a sudden resting of us in and out of the breakout rooms, but you know, we're all resilient. We can deal with that, being thrown out of our breakouts. Look, I just wanted to thank Endeavour Energy, Vita Cheeseman and Kate McHugh and the whole team for putting this together. This is still fairly new for us, but I think this is a great way of engaging, trying to keep it contemporary, mix it up a bit, keep it interesting. It is hard to sit through long talks on Zoom and long sessions on Zoom. We all get distracted, but I hope that we've been able to keep your attention there. I think we've still got most, we've lost a few in the parallel universe, but we got most of them there. Some great themes that came up today. I think this is an ongoing discussion, and Endeavour are certainly super keen to make sure they hear from customers, consumers, and also civil society advocacy groups like us and the committee for Sydney who are on today. So I just wanted to, again, thank all those people and just ask, Pierre, is there any closing remarks that you'd like to make to everyone today? Sorry to put you on the spot. No? If not, why don't we wrap it there? We'll give you 7 minutes of extra time in your day. Thanks, Guy. Guy's back on. Appreciate everyone's attendance. I'm sure Endeavour will follow up on all those questions that weren't answered. Take your feedback back into the planning of their side of your electricity service. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, Guy.
Thank you. See you.
Thank you.